That's one of those examples of always confusing Malaysian and Indonesian in my head.
Which one's that? Mereka.
Well, I would have said silakan, but Malaysians would say boleh.
We'll get to that because that's the question I want to ask you. I remember you had a interesting quip about confusing rapat, I think it was. But anyway, for the students here, we'll get started because I think we don't have too much time. This is Puck Joel Backwell. You happy for them to address you as Puck? I gave them
I'm not that old. I'm not a bapak.
I'm trying to teach them good grammar or good cultural knowledge for the exams and stuff.
So call me Mas, not bapak.
I did give them a quick intro. So I mentioned your law background, and you'd also worked on the case with Myuran Sukumaran and Andrew Chan. I also mentioned working at the embassy in Kuala Lumpur. And I mentioned very briefly your work now at the Department of Education. So they have a bit of a background about you, but I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add. I do know Whitney had a good question just to sort of ask you about your background. What's your background with studying Indonesian?
So, sorry, there's a background debate going on. Apologies. So I studied Indonesian through school, but high school. So I didn't do it at primary school. Took it up in year 8. I think we had. I think we did 1 year of Indonesian and 1 year of German, and then we had to choose which one we wanted to continue in year 9 and 10, and then it was. I think it was optional after year 10. I think you had to do one of them, one of the two, through to the end of year 10. So I chose Indonesian, partly because I had a really good teacher. And then I studied it in VCE, and then I went on to university. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to move rooms. Just a bit of background. Just bear with me.
Whitney, Yamano, Audrey, Maddie, Sarah. Just by the way, we're just going to do Q&A from the start. So feel free to jump in with questions whenever you have.
So where was the document that you had for the questions that I put on?
I'll email it to you.
Thank you.
So who else is on the call? A lot of initials.
Those students, the students are all studying from home today. So I've got Audrey, Maddie, and Sarah. If you guys have turn your video on, it'd be nice to see your faces.
They're all in their pajamas. It's all right. I get it. That's okay. If you'd rather put up a Bitmoji or something instead of your camera, that's equally okay.
This has been my life for the past 6 months, so staring at avatars.
It's no different in the office. It's about 50-50 strike rate between those that are happy putting their cameras on and those who aren't. It's a bit windy out here, but can you hear me okay? Now, I understand you'd like me to do the rest of this entirely in Bahasa Indonesia, is that right? I'll try to mix it up a bit. Gado-gado. So why are you studying Indonesian? I'll ask you before I talk about why I did it, but you are in the minority, but the glorious minority, so why are you all still studying Indonesian?
I think because we got the opportunity to study Indonesian from year 7, and then so we did that, and then it becomes optional, I think, after year 8, and I kept on doing it. And then I actually stopped enjoying Indonesian as much, and then I went on the Indonesian like kind of exchange trip type thing, and then I kind of like totally fell in love with it again. Like it was so much fun, and I think ever since then I've kind of really enjoyed the language, and I'm also debating whether once I finish year 12 also keeping on studying it in university as well, because I also want to do law at Monash. So, and I know that they do Indonesian there, so I think that's where I'm kind of headed at.
So you're still going to do law, even though it's now $500,000. Well done.
Yeah, I know.
And for others, we've got Audrey, Yamuna, Maddie, Sarah, Emma. What has kept you in the game this long?
Well, so I'm just about to finish up year 12 Indo, which is kind of strange actually to say. But I think mainly just like Whitney said, also going on the trip reinforced this, but being able to speak another language, just communicate with people, especially when we traveled there. It's so nice to be able to talk to someone the way they normally speak. It's just, yeah, really cool.
Is there anyone still doing Indonesian in year 12 who has never been to Indonesia? Thanks, Sarah.
Not from my group. I think everybody has been at some. Not everybody with the school trip, but definitely has been on a holiday. If not,
Yeah, I mean, for me, I had 2 trips in year 10. So I had a school trip to Ubud back before it became Machet like everything else. And then at the end of the year, I lived in Bandung for 3 months over the entire summer break and lived with a host family, which is an experience that we've tried to recreate for year 9 students in Victoria through the Young Leaders to Indonesia program, which none of you will benefit from, but the aim of that is really to give students who are at that decision point about whether to continue a full immersion experience. Because I think, and I'm hearing it here, but it's not easy to learn a language, and if you're never able to really put it into practice in real life with real people in their own country, I think it can be hard to motivate yourself for 6 years. So in the department anyway, we see that as a really important component for motivating people to continue. And once I went and lived with the host family, I was hooked for all the reasons a lot of you have said about, just the pleasure of being able to communicate with people in their own language, start to understand some of the jokes and the humour. Indonesians are really, really funny people. They've got, they do double entendre and sarcasm so well. Particularly my host brother, who he's a lawyer now. He has a very dark sense of humour. So I just thought he was really standoffish. And then as my language improved, I realised he was just really, really funny, but had an extremely dry sense of humour. I do feel pity for the international students who study in our schools and how they cope with our Aussie sense of humour and our slang. And I found it really humbling too, being in a country where you don't speak the language as your own and feeling a bit on the outer and feeling a bit anxious and nervous every time you open your mouth is how a lot of Australians feel, particularly first and second generation migrants. And I think one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about language learning is actually to build a bit more empathy and perspective into our own students, because I think, I'm not suggesting life's easy as a teenager in Australia, particularly in COVID, but I think it's important to have that perspective of what life is like for people your own age in other parts of the world. I told Erin I wouldn't ramble, so you need to ask me questions or I'll keep rambling.
After you finished studying at Monash, what kind of job opportunities were there, including like you doing law as well as like being able to speak Indonesian?
Yeah, so it's not a good thing that not many people study Indonesian through school and university. numbers are really low, scarily low. Given it's a country of 250 million people on our doorstep, it actually really worries me that so few Australians speak Indonesian. Genuinely worries me because, I mean, I could. There's no other two countries in the world that are neighbours that understand less about each other. Like most countries in Europe and Asia, if you live across the border from a country, you know a lot about the culture and politics of the country over the border, and often the language as well. Particularly in Europe, where they're all bilingual and trilingual because they, have neighbouring countries with often quite different languages actually. So it's generally troubling, but also it means we're missing out on a whole lot of opportunities. So I'll circle back to your question, Whitney, but I think the employment opportunities now are probably a lot more than they were when I finished university. So I did an arts law degree, partly just because I wanted to and it was interesting, but partly because what I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And my view was that if I studied law and Indonesian, I would be able to go and get a job with the UN or DFAT or a company that had operations in Indonesia, or as it turned out, a law firm. So when I finished uni, I applied for clerkships at all of the law firms that had Jakarta offices. And because no other graduates spoke Indonesian, and that's actually still the case, I had a real competitive advantage. I think I got clerkships with all the top tier firms that I applied for that had a Jakarta office because I really emphasised that in my application. But I actually reckon there's a lot more opportunities now because, as you'll all know, I'm sure Puck McMahon has taught you about economics, not just language, but this concept of a demographic dividend. So Indonesia has a really young population. And what that means is they've got, tens of millions of consumers of products, but they're also really active on social media. There's a huge startup community in not just Jakarta, in Bandung, in Jogja, in Surabaya and Medan. So for a lot of those tech startup companies and companies that are involved in logistics and supply chains and, online training, there are massive markets in Indonesia. And so if you finish the end of your degree and you've got commerce in Indonesian or IT in Indonesian or law in Indonesian, it gives you an extra advantage when you're applying to companies. But it's not just companies that operate in Indonesia. They might operate somewhere else in Asia or Southeast Asia, like Malaysia or Brunei or Singapore. And if you study Indonesian, what it tells the employer is that you've got a sort of a global understanding. You're, less likely to have faux pas with potential customers from other countries. You're less likely to put your feet up on the desk or say the kind of things that Australians think are normal but are extremely offensive in not just Indonesia but a lot of parts of Asia. So I think for me, I was very focused on becoming a lawyer. I think regardless of what discipline you're interested in coming out of uni or TAFE, wherever you end up, I think it's up to you to really articulate that in your job applications and highlight it in your CV, because often you'll have to educate the employer. Like employers might say, oh, we've got a factory in Thailand, you speak Indonesian, not really relevant. So it is actually part of, what you're going to need in applying for jobs for you to emphasize what Indonesian has given you in terms of understanding customers, understanding cultures, being able to build cross-border partnerships. But yeah, I think if you can articulate that well, it's a massive selling point for you in applying for jobs in any industry with any company that's not just global, but has some connectivity to the world. So another example is it doesn't mean, you're only going to get a job with a multinational. There's small companies in Australia and who have, a single source of supply might be in Asia, or it might be a tourism company where the majority of their customers, even though they're based here in Victoria, are from other countries. So again, having someone like you as an employee is going to be really important to them in succeeding in whatever that business venture is. And I think COVID sucks. Don't get me wrong, but it's really accelerated the move to online engagement, online sales, online marketplaces, use of Zoom and WebEx and other technologies for meetings. So I think even though it feels like we're kind of closing the doors because all the international flights have stopped, it's actually making it easier to engage with partners in other countries because the whole world has had to lift their technological capability for online engagement, whether it's in the classroom or in business meetings. So it could actually create more opportunities for someone coming into the workforce who wants to work with a company that's got a global focus, because actually lowered the barrier to entry for companies to engage with partners in other countries. So it's a very long answer, Whitney, but in a nutshell, it was my selling point for my first job, and I reckon you're going to have more opportunities for which this selling point will resonate with a potential employer.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, that was really helpful.
Other questions?
Yeah, I've got one. I'm also kind of interested in work in intergovernmental organisations or NGOs or like cross-country organisations. But I was just kind of wondering why you ended up, or what drew you towards law as opposed to like a different discipline which can also then be used across the world.
So first of all, I don't know if they've improved, but career counsellors back then were pretty crap, which is not their fault. They just, the world has changed so quickly and the number of opportunities has ballooned, and that traditional form of career counselling just doesn't really match the world anymore. So hopefully your career counsellors are much more savvy than mine was. But I guess, the answers I got when I talked about what I should do post-school were pretty limited. So that they weren't suggesting working for NGOs or sort of anything beyond an accountancy or a law firm, or so that's one reason. The other reason was I loved Jeffrey Robertson when I was a kid, so I read a lot of books that he wrote about human rights law and fighting for the little guy, and so I wanted to be a human rights lawyer, not necessarily in a law firm. So this is back in year 10 or 11, working for a big NGO or the World Bank or the International Criminal Court. And by the time I'd finished uni, I had a HECS debt of about $50,000. So I couldn't really afford to go and volunteer or go in entry level to a human rights NGO. So purely pragmatic reasons, I applied for articles at a corporate law firm with the idea that I'd do it for a year or two, pay off my HECS debt, working for an evil corporate law firm, and then I'd go and work for an NGO. And I stayed at Freehills for about 6 or 7 years because they had an amazing pro bono practice. And so they actually did a lot of work for NGOs. We set up a homeless person's legal clinic down in St Kilda. We did some programs with at-risk youth, and they sponsored me to work on the Bali 9 case. So I kind of got to I got the best of both worlds because I got that legal training on a good salary, but I also was able to end up doing the thing that I'd studied law to do in the first place. Again, because of Indonesian. So the way I got into the Bali 9 case was I went to a lecture, public lecture that Julian McMahon gave, and he'd just come off the back of defending Van Nguyen, who got executed in Singapore. And Myuran Sukumaran's family had asked him to take on this case, and he was sort of presenting to a bunch of law graduates and young lawyers, and was talking about the death penalty. And he mentioned that he'd taken on this new case, but he'd never been to Indonesia. And he said, if anyone out there speaks Indonesian, just come and chat to me afterwards. And I think I was the only person who contacted him. And he said, what are you doing next week? And then I was on a plane to Jakarta and with him and Lex Lasry, and sort of helping them navigate Jakarta traffic and Jakarta courts, and ended up actually representing Myuran all the way to the Constitutional Court in Indonesia, which was pretty amazing and humbling experience. So again, I mean, I wouldn't have got that opportunity but for my Indonesian experience and the fact that so few other people have that expertise still in 2020. So it is a real competitive advantage, whatever you end up doing. And I should know this. I don't know if Indonesian is one of the UN languages that you need to speak in order to get a job with the UN or the World Bank. Arabic is, Spanish is. I'm not sure if Indonesian is.
French, yeah. I don't think Indonesian is up there.
Anyway, it's not the only criteria, but that's why I learned Spanish actually.
Just a quick question related to this one is the Bali 9, and particularly the executions, were a bit of a dark chapter in the Australia-Indonesia relationship. From your perspective, I mean, despite it being a dark chapter, did it also create opportunities for us to build on and work on that relationship?
So I don't think it was a dark chapter. I think that's a very Australian perspective. Most Indonesians didn't care. I think Chappelle Corby was a much bigger problem for Indonesia than the Bali 9. So the Myuran and Andrew weren't the only people on death row. They weren't even the only people who got executed that night. I think Indonesia was just as worried or more worried about their relationship with some of the other countries with people on death row. For example, the Philippines, they gave the Filipino woman a reprieve at the last minute, probably because they saw the Philippines mattering more to them than Indonesia. So to me, it was more a representation of how little Indonesia probably cares about Australia. And there really is a sense that we need them more than they need us. And at a people-to-people level, you know, I mean, I would meet people in the street or talk to taxi drivers, and they either didn't know, didn't care, or, you know, it didn't change their perception of Australian people, which was generally pretty positive. I think they all thought Chappelle was kind of taking the piss. Excuse my French, but I think with Myuran and Andrew, the way that we managed that case, at least the legal team, was really, really respectful. And the first thing we did when we came in was we hired an Indonesian lawyer, Pak Mulia Lubis, really, really respected lawyer in Indonesia, who, you know, we never presented the case as, you know, you've got the death penalty means you're backwards and barbaric, or, you know, this is your legal system, we respect your legal system, but within the rules of your own legal system, we don't think they deserve to die. Yeah, I mean, the Indonesia-Australian relationship and Australia's relationship with Southeast Asia has ebbed and flowed for decades. You know, East Timor was probably a lower point for the Australia-Indonesia relationship. just like Mahathir being around was not a great time for the Australia-Malaysia and through them ASEAN relationship. So I don't know. We have stoushes all the time. When we were spying on SBE and his wife, that didn't go down very well. But I think there's enough of there's enough in common to sustain and build on if we ever put the energy into it. So I think if we were to put 1% of the energy into Indonesia that we put into China, we could do great things together. We've got so many Victorians learning Indonesian, at least at a primary school level. We've got, a lot of universities are really building up their Indonesia programs again after a bit of a hiatus. So you go to Monash and they're offering scholarships for basically any arts graduate, undergrad, to go and live in Indonesia, all expenses paid. I think the problem is at a political level and a senior business level. I just don't think we're doing enough to leverage the potential relationship. But I as personally painful as the Bali 9 case was, I don't think it did any lasting damage to our relationship with Indonesia.
Did you have to use your Indonesian much when you were preparing the case for court or when you were actually in court?
Oh, both. I had to translate most of the documents, so I was up on many occasions till 3 a.m. with my kamus out trying to translate the appeal documents. And like when we're in the Bali appeal court, I was literally sitting next to Myuran and interpreting what they were saying throughout the court proceedings. So we didn't have an official interpreter. I was it. So yes, used it heavily. But it's not just in that formal sense. The other way was when Julian and Lex would go in to have meetings with government officials, we would often do that with Pat Mulia in the room, but having one of the whiteys in the room who spoke the language was just a real sign of respect. Even if I wasn't formally interpreting through the meeting, just being able to do the introductory remarks in Bahasa and throw in a bit of Javanese was it's a huge sign of respect for your counterparties, your colleagues, and you can't underestimate that. And you if you haven't seen this already, you will see this when you go out into the business world. And it might not be an Indonesian counterpart; it might be Thai or Sri Lankan or whatever. But just the world of difference when an Australian business person walks into a meeting with just a couple of words and a bit of an understanding and effort to understand the country and culture of the person on the other side of the table, just how quickly that helps you build a relationship with that person compared to the white Australian who sort of rocks in with the Hawaiian shirt on and, acts very Australian. I saw that a lot when I was working as the Trade Commissioner. Just the vibe in the room, their willingness to follow up and maintain that relationship, it's chalk and cheese.
I'm a bit conscious about how much time you have, so whenever you need to leave, just let us know. But other questions?
Yeah, I'll have to leave it about 10 to.
Okay.
But happy to take another question or two.
Just one quick one from me, and sort of touching on your time at the embassy in Kuala Lumpur. We as teachers of Indonesian never really bring it up, but the Indonesia's neighbour obviously is quite a significant a neighbour for us. how useful was your Indonesian knowledge and skills when you went to Malaysia?
Well, got me the job for starters. Is my sound gone a bit funny? It's okay. So it got me the job. So normally if you want to work for DFAT or Austrade, it takes years before you get a posting, but I got a posting as my first job because I already spoke Indonesian and there was a view that I would pick Malaysian up pretty quickly. Probably showed a bit of a lack of understanding on behalf of Austrade as to the difference, but it worked for me. Malaysian and Indonesian are actually really, really similar in a formal sense. So if you put a Quran in Indonesian next to the newspaper in Malaysia, that sort of formal language, it's quite similar. But the informal kind of street slang is very, very different. And all the common words are the words that are very different. So even, puan and tuan instead of ibu and bapak. And even, selamat siang and sore is different. So in the end, it didn't actually help that much for my day-to-day engagement with taxi drivers and stall owners, but was really helpful when I was giving formal presentations and was able to always begin with a couple of minutes of Bahasa Malaysia. But it really, really, really helped in doing my job. Not just in terms of the people that I engaged with in that diplomatic role, but with my own team. So it just meant that my own local staff who worked for me in the office, who were all Malaysian, just had way more sort of respect and trust in me than some of my predecessors, because they sort of understood from day one that I was there to, take them seriously and treat them and their country with respect. So I guess that's the other thing. It's not just about your customers, it's also about your colleagues on the ground, particularly where you work for a big NGO or a big multinational that's got employees who are from all around the world. Having that language and cultural background really helps with that, with those relationships as well.
It's about 10 to now, unless anyone had any pressing questions.
When's your exam?
The oral exam is next week, 7 days.
Have fun. If you've been there, you're already miles. If you've been to Indonesia, you're already miles ahead of where most of the others will be. I really enjoyed my oral exam.
Any tips?
I felt enjoy it. It was 6 years that I worked to be able to walk into that room and have a conversation in a language that wasn't my own. It was really satisfying. The examiner's not there to trip you up. Their job is actually to try and give you the opportunity to demonstrate everything that you've learned over the last 6 years. It's not a gotcha call. So, I guess one tip would be just make sure you've memorized, 8 to 10 phrases or, blocks of 3 or 4 sentences, so that if you do get a bit nervous and trip up on your tongue, you can just fall back to one of those just to find your rhythm again. I found that was helpful. You sort of go down a rabbit hole and hit a dead end, and you can drop back to a phrase that you're comfortable with, and it just gives you a chance to take a breath. And don't slow down. Also, it's order. You don't, because we don't do many orals in the Australian education system. Like in the US, everything is oral, and you're standing up in class and Socratic method. We do a lot of written examinations in Australia, so we're not actually that used to oral exams, and it can be quite nerve-wracking, and you talk too fast. So just, every minute or so, just remind yourself to take a breath. Nothing wrong with pausing for a few seconds. It's actually very culturally appropriate. It's another thing Australians do. We have to fill space. So we talk quickly, we talk over each other, we start answering before the person's finished their sentence. basically the rest of the non-English world, that's not how they communicate. They're comfortable with pauses. You walk into meetings and people might say nothing for 20 seconds because they're just reflecting and pausing and being quite respectful. And then the whitey just has to jump in and say something because they get uncomfortable with the silence. But that's normal in most of the world. What we would call an uncomfortable silence is very respectful in most countries in the world. So find a way to do that. Work that into your exam. Say, just pause for like 5 or 6 seconds, and then in Indonesian, you can tell them that one of the things you've learned beyond language about the cultural side is the respectfulness of silence in a place like Indonesia. Throw that one into your exam as a way to clear your head and show your cultural competency at the same time. There you go.
All right, we'll leave it there. We're definitely over time now, but thank you very much. And can everybody just ucapkan terima kasih? It's been, it's always great talking to you, but I think the students got quite a lot out of it.
Always good to meet people who have stuck with Indonesian, and you should be very proud of getting this far. And for those who asked, I would absolutely encourage you to continue through your next stage of your education, because I think it more and more is starting to have a real value on your CV and in your cover letters in a world that is becoming, thankfully, increasingly global, regardless of the short-term impacts of COVID. So well done and good luck.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Makasih.